Yeah, thank you for having us. So as Tomic said, my name is Ryan Bregante. I'm 37 years old. I'm born and raised in San Diego, California. I was born with a genetic condition where I was born with an extra X chromosome. So I have something called Klinefelter syndrome, or also known as XXY. Many of the people in our community prefer to call it XXY because when you say Klinefelter syndrome, there's a negative connotation around the word syndrome. And many of the men in our community, let's see, some of the statistics are 1 in 500 males will have Klinefelter syndrome, but only 25% will get diagnosed at some point in their lifetime. So 75% of the people that have XXY will die never knowing. Also, Klinefelter syndrome is more common than Down syndrome, but nobody knows about it because we're hiding in plain sight. So I started an organization called Living with XXY, a nonprofit organization, November 6, 2019. And I'll get more into it, but I want to introduce Kelsey. And so I was diagnosed in utero. My mom found out through an amnio, and I was told at the age of 9 that I had Klinefelter syndrome. And Kelsey is the mom of a son that has XXY. So can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Kelsey, and my son was born without having any genetic testing done. So we found out later in life when he was 10 years old, and he has the same condition, 47XXY. We call it simply XXY in our house. And he was told right away at 10, and he is almost 14 right now.
With Klinefelter syndrome, it was diagnosed in 1942 by Harry Klinefelter. And so our community, unfortunately, has had 80 years of misinformation. So when you read about Klinefelter syndrome online or you Google it, there's a lot of really outdated studies, a lot of misinformation, things that haven't changed. And so the doctors now and people in psychology, people that are learning about Klinefelter syndrome now in their textbooks are still continuing to learn information from 30, 40, 50 years ago. A lot of the imagery online that you see of Klinefelter syndrome it depicts this person that could be potentially aggressive, go to jail, more likely to end up in jail, or depicts like a mental retardation, which we don't even use in terminology anymore. And so the reason why our perspective is really crucially important is because you see the lived experience, and you see a lot of the people that don't come out of the shadows with this diagnosis. And with Living with XXY, I started this organization because in 2017, I went to a conference and I met people for the first time in my life at 31 years old with this condition. I never Googled it up until that point, even though I was told at the age of 9. And when I Googled it, it just blew my mind what was online about me. And I was like, what's online is not me. There's got to be other guys out there with this condition. They're just like me. And so I kind of went on a quest to find people. And I traveled to Australia, New Zealand, traveled all around the United States. And I met all these amazing men and little boys and families that had kids with XXY that were nothing what it depicted, what like the books and the literature said about our condition. And so I just started a YouTube channel in September of 2017. And that is kind of like what has taken me on this journey to start this nonprofit, to change this misinformation, to give people in our community a voice. Because what's happening now is the outside, the doctors, everyone else, the psychologists, everyone is telling us who we are, and the health problems you're going to have. We've had plenty of doctors tell us like, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. There's no point in you going to college, like all these horrible things. And now what's even more important is families that are being diagnosed with Klinefelter syndrome in utero, the mothers are being told to terminate their pregnancies, that try again, that your son's going to be mentally retarded. You're going to have to take care of him his whole life. Like all these like horrible things that are just complete misrepresentations of our community. And so it's really good for us to talk about to all of you about, what you might learn in a textbook about our condition is very unlikely to find someone that's going to have all of those traits. Now, the biggest thing here is that I'm going to talk a lot about XXY throughout this class, but the biggest thing here is it's a spectrum. And when you read about it or when you Google it online, you never see the word spectrum. So some of the individuals, there's a condition within XXY. So I have non-mosaic XXY. So it means all my cells are XXY. There are men in our community where their cells they're considered mosaic. So they have some XY cells and some XXY. One of the big things here, though, is with our condition, our bodies don't make testosterone. And so a lot of us have to use some type of testosterone supplementation, and then we're infertile. So we can't have kids. And a lot of the men choose to do donor sperm or adopt. Just because we can't have biological kids doesn't mean we can't be fathers. There is a surgery, it's called microtest, and it's a medical intervention surgery that they can do to try to extract sperm, but it's really rare to have success in our community with this. Kelsey, what is kind of your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, so I have a very similar, but from a different angle perspective as Ryan. I'm a mother to 3 boys, and Elliot is the oldest, and he's the one who has XXY. So I think part of my passion from just talking with anybody about XXY is, destigmatizing anything that may be out there, because the research is so old and it's honestly unlike anything you've probably ever seen. When it comes to other diagnoses, it's just light years behind as far as textbooks and what people know. So obviously that's one thing. But what the nonprofit has been able to do is create a safe space for people to talk and to share. We use the word coming out, but it's really just sharing that they have XXY in a safe space and feeling supported. So I think keeping that alive for my son, and then for future kids and for adult men, is super important to me, so that there is a sense of community.
Good. What's the difference between Ryan and me? I think we both are 6'4", if I'm not mistaken, or about 6'4". Are you 6'4", Ryan?
Yes.
Yeah, so we are the same height, right? You actually have more facial hair than I do, and we talked about it before. And I don't have a XXY, and maybe the difference is that you actually take shots of testosterone, although I got mine on Monday because of my sickness, so my body could be a little bit stronger because I'm collapsing. And I get to be a male. I don't have to define it to anyone. I don't have to fight for it. And you're intelligent, and so am I. So what's the difference between us, right? Is that I get to enjoy a label that you have to fight for. So that's a transitional sort of statement to a question. Is XXY an intersex, or should it be under the category of intersex? And what do you guys think? And are there individual cases on case-by-case basis?
You asked a lot of questions, and I'll try to recall and work my way through. So first should this be considered intersex? I think the first stopping point is the difference in what intersex is defined. So very practically speaking, the US doesn't technically, in most situations, consider a sex chromosome disorder to equal intersex. So no. And also in other parts of the world, intersex is defined very differently. And so it does fall under that definition in other parts of the world. So yes and no. I think, and then you mentioned certain situations. Of course, there are, certain situations where somebody's reproductive organs maybe don't align with who they are or any other external presentation. And so that can also happen in somebody with XXY, just as it can happen to anybody, or anybody can feel differently about the way they're presenting than who they are. But where it gets sticky and where it gets hard is, like you mentioned, sort of that fighting to be able to define yourself. So I think that's a struggle. I have not, like you mentioned, I haven't had to experience that. I haven't had to fight for defining who I am because other people have defined me. And that's where my defensiveness, I guess, comes in as a mom. Elliot could be whoever he wants to be. If he were to identify, you know, different than a male, that would be one thing, but it wouldn't be because he's XXY. And so I think that's sort of where I try to draw the line in my head. Like Ryan knows I'm super, super liberal. Like I support everything. And I have a really hard time when other people label anybody. So I don't want anybody to label this community as something that they aren't able to advocate and label themselves. So that's really where I get stuck, or where I have a hard time.
So the topic definitely, so here I am, like I've been working my entire life to be outside of a box. The doctors, the psychologists, like educators, everyone in my entire life, I've had to work 3 times harder than everyone else to have what I have. And so I got bullied as a kid, but I'm glad that I wouldn't go back and change that, because it gave me the thick skin to be able to deal with a lot of this stuff, especially revolving around this topic. People in our community, we have a Y chromosome. Just because we have small testicles, you know, there's also a stigma of micropenis out there, that we have a bunch of data that's going to be coming out soon that debunks that myth that XXY has micropenis. And that to so many men is such a it hits you so hard when you read those things online. You don't want to open up about something that you have. Even if you do open up about it, you're then being told by everyone else that doesn't know anything about your condition, that hasn't asked you about, hey, what's your life like? They just say, oh, you're intersex. Oh, you're this, you're that. And there's a lot of people in our community that don't want to be labeled by like an I, you know, by the LGBTQIA+. Like they don't want to be on that. And they should have, you know, talk about inclusivity, right? Like we're being told by so many people that, oh, you're intersex, you're this, you're trans, you're that. Like, but then where is it for our community to have our voice? And when we open up and we try to have our voice, everyone shuts us down. Everyone says, oh no, that's not, you're not male, you're not this, you're intersex. There's a lot of videos on TikTok that we've had to, I started to do it, but it's just absolutely exhausting, the amount of misinformation that's being spread on TikTok, that it's just like, you can't sit on there all day and constantly try to educate people that don't want to be educated. And so that's you know, in our community, a lot of men that have shared their stories have asked like, hey, can you please take my story down? And I ask why, and they're like, I'm being told by other people that I'm this, I'm that, like especially intersex. And there's this connotation like intersex is not male or female. Like there's like a lot of people label XXY as non-binary because we have an extra X chromosome. But then when you look at the other trisomy X, where girls have an extra X chromosome, they're not being labeled as like something else. Or the guys that are being diagnosed with Jacobs syndrome, which is XYY, they have an extra Y chromosome. There was a thing a long time ago that they were super male, but there's not a push to label them and put them into the intersex box. It's only the XXYs. And so it's a very, it's definitely when you're labeling people, whether it's XXY, whether it's intersex, whether it's gay, bisexual, whatever that is, when you're someone that doesn't understand what that person is going through and you label them because of what the book told you or what someone else told you about who they are, that person just shuts down.